Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Susan here with the home edition of Your Voice with Dr. Susan. In response to the emergency with this pandemic related to COVID-19, I've been doing online workshops and talks and interviews with different experts to help people cope with all the various challenges that this pandemic has presented for all of us. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be back. We had taken a break last week, but now we are back. So welcome. Good to see all of you. And I have a very special guest tonight that I am so excited to be speaking with. And I am here with Dr. Fallon Ukpe. And this is going to be just such an interesting and fun discussion. Welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's great. Okay. And so I just want to introduce you to everyone. And Dr. Ukpe is an MD and an MBA. She has an MD and an MBA. And she is a dynamic and entrepreneurial leader, strategic advisor, and investor, and a best-selling author who helps transform bold ideas into thriving businesses or influential philanthropic organizations. She's a physician by background who has spent her career in management consulting and venture capital investing. She's also an engaging speaker who has reached thousands of people through talks given at national conferences, corporate events, and universities. Her best-selling book, Life is a Squiggly Line, details how she's created a career she loves and the key lessons she's learned along the way. Her hope is to inspire people to dream boldly, live bravely, and create meaningful impact. She is a first-generation Nigerian American who grew up in Houston, Texas. She holds the Bachelor of Arts from Johns Hopkins University. She holds a Doctor of Medicine from Duke University School of Medicine and a Master's of Business Administration from Duke University's Facua School of Business. She is so passionate about initiatives related to education, healthcare, and women and minority entrepreneurs and investors. Dr. Fallon enjoys mentoring and supporting programs for at-risk youth. She's an avid traveler who loves to read, takes walks with her beagle, and watch Duke baseball games. Fallon also enjoys wine tasting and trying her hand at new recipes, especially French and Italian dishes. She is also a mentor for the Mentor Project. And I am so grateful and honored to have you here on the show tonight.
Thank you for having me.
You know, what's so interesting about what you did was you first went to medical school, and that's really fascinating, and then ended up not really following in terms of the medical journey. But why don't we start with, how did you get to medical school? Did you always want to go to medical school?
Probably the biggest question that I get is, how did you go to medical school and now you don't practice medicine? What happened? And it was a kid who always wanted to be a doctor. So in my household growing up, service and impact were really important. And they were two big things that my parents talked about a lot. And when I was younger, I said, I really want to be a doctor. I was really excited about that being the way that I worked with people and that I was able to help people. And so since the age of 7, that's what I wanted to do. And I was fortunate enough to go to Hopkins for undergrad. And I learned a lot about healthcare at Hopkins. And one of the big things that it made me think about being there was I was at one of arguably the best medical institutions in the world. And I started to think, well, if I'm at one of the best places in the world, what does that mean that healthcare looks like in other places around the world where people and populations don't have access to that level of healthcare? And what can I do about that? What can I do to make healthcare better no matter where people are? And at that point, I started really to think about how could I change healthcare? The other thing that I realized that I hadn't understood previously was that healthcare was a business. The people who were in charge of insurance plans, hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, they were running businesses. And that to me was so foreign because in my mind, healthcare was only to take care of people. I didn't think about profitability and I didn't understand what that meant until then. And so when I started to understand those two things, and I was finishing at Hopkins, I had made a decision that I really wanted to understand the business side and be able to talk that language because I felt like as a physician, that was the best way I could advocate for my patients, my future patients, and make sure that they had access to healthcare and the best healthcare that they could. And from there, I spent a year working for a nonprofit in Texas, so went back to Texas. And then after that, went to Duke and did medical school and business school at Duke and had an incredible time and just learned even more about healthcare and what some of the opportunities were for improving healthcare. And so as I wrapped up my time at Duke, I even surprised myself, to be honest, as I thought about kind of what the other avenues were. And I was fortunate enough to be surrounded not only by great family and friends, but some really, really good mentors that I met along the way, and thought about what the other opportunities could look like and other pathways after medical school. And it was a really tough decision because at that point I had wanted to be a doctor for so long. That's all I thought about. But looked at other types of pathways and in the end decided that I would go to McKinsey. And so after medical school and finishing business school, spent some time at McKinsey as a management consultant, which was a fantastic experience. But really it came down to thinking about where I could have the biggest impact that aligned with the things that I was most interested in. And I say often that I am so grateful and so humbled to have had the opportunity to train and be a physician. And it is, I think, one of the most incredible professions that I think someone could have. I am also a person who had a lot of interest and was very interested in thinking about, well, how can I do other things that impact and make healthcare better, and utilizing other skill sets that I had. And so that's how I made the decision, which was a hard one, but the right one for me, to leave Duke and then go into management consulting after Duke.
There's so many interesting things about what you said. I mean, there's so many. So the first thing is an important lesson is that you thought that you wanted to be, and you did want to be a doctor since you were a child, and you get to medical school, or even before that, you realize that there are other things within the medical profession. And so what's interesting is for those people, and I hear this from a lot of youth and even young adults, that they're not really sure, or they think that they know what they want to do for the rest of their life, or, you know, people who don't know, oh, everybody else knows what they want to do. But sometimes somebody like you could think you know what you want to do with the rest of your life professionally, but then you find something and say, oh no, this is not what I thought. And to be able to allow yourself to explore another calling or to find out something else. And, you know, there's so much about the importance when you said that you realized that medicine is also a business. And having had some experience both personally and professionally in the hospital industry, it's so fascinating because without money, hospitals and healthcare can't exist, right? We need money. So, and I think it's such a blessing to have someone who has the medical information and background to be in a position to look at it as a business. Because oftentimes, particularly in large corporations and in the hospital settings, you have the two sides that are really opposing. So you have the medical side, and then you have the business or the financial side. And usually at the top of those hospitals or corporations, they're fighting each other. But what makes it great, someone like you, is that you know both sides, and both sides can trust you because they know that you're going to advocate for both. Have you found that to be an advantage?
Absolutely. It's really neat to be able to look at something through multiple lenses. And so just have layers of understanding and also be able to translate between the two. And as you point out, there is that tension between the business case or understanding the financials and the clinical case and what physicians and other types of providers need to do every day to make sure that patients are safe, that they get the care that they need, that we're able to advance and innovate care. And that can be really tough. And what I find that becomes more and more important, and I think we're even seeing this with the pandemic now, is that it's so important not just to have one lens, but multiple lenses. And I think even if one person doesn't have multiple lenses, even a team that can have the multiple lenses and bring that all together is important. So I think multidisciplinary learning and understanding is critical, not just in healthcare, but for how we operate any organization, whether it's for-profit, non-for-profit. And I believe that's really critical to be able to strategically drive forward and address the needs of people we're trying to impact and serve.
Yes, and I agree. And we see this right now during this pandemic, that we really need all of the different pieces to come together in terms of science, medical, politics, business, manufacturing, everyone, media, in terms of getting the appropriate and correct messages out to citizens to be able to hear the messages. So, I think what we're going through right now is the ultimate in terms of the needs of having that multidisciplinary and how every skill and everyone needs to work together. And now more than ever before, because we have technology that can bridge people together, it's worldwide. So it's not even just local, it is worldwide that we need to do this, because on so many levels, right? Because we're all traveling. And people travel, and that's how the pandemic spreads, right? So, and also how information spreads. And so, I heard this phrase on a call that I attended yesterday, and I was really struck by it, that we also have it's called an infodemic, because there's so much misinformation being spread, and that is negatively impacting on our society so much. That could be a whole, 4-hour talk in and of itself.
It really could. It really could. We're so interconnected. And like you said, it's no longer just the boundary of one country, state. It really is global. And we are globally dependent on each other. And so much so, in so many ways, I think people tend to think about it in manufacturing, business, things like that. But our health depends not only on the person who's in the same country or down the street, but literally around the world. And I think that we've started to understand that a whole lot more. And we're starting to be more thoughtful about who our neighbor is, and expanding that perspective, that our neighbor is somebody who's sitting across the ocean, not just someone who's 5 minutes away.
Which I want to go back to and bring us back to tonight's topic, because there's so many people listening that are really trying to figure out, either for the first time, where do they want their career to go? Or there's lots of people that are reinventing themselves. During this time, there's been a lot of changes. A lot of people are unemployed. The business world has changed in terms of what they can and cannot do. And they may have taken this time in the past 4 or 5 months to rediscover, oh, wait, what do I really want to do with my career? And what's really interesting is you have published this wonderful book in terms of the squiggly line, which, I'm familiar with parts of it, and I'm looking forward to finish reading it. And what you talk about in the talks that you give is the tips and the skills needed to design the life that you want to lead, both professionally as well as personally. And, you don't just talk it, you've walked the walk and you've lived that life. So you're in a position now where you've done it, and you're doing all the things that you wanted to. So perhaps I can ask you, what are some of the things that you recommend for people that are looking for those skills? What do you think that people need in order to have or learn to do in order to create that vision and make their dream life, their dream profession actually happen?
I'm happy to talk about that. I think one thing I'll add is that it's a journey, and it is a continuous journey. And so I've certainly made decisions and taken certain paths, but it's not over. And I continue to every day, and as years pass, discover more and more about myself. I continue to grow through the experiences that I have, and that opens up different windows, and it changes how I think about things, and even what I think about doing next. And so it is a choice that you will make and that you will continue to make. It's not necessarily a one-time thing. And so it's a bit of a practice, where you will do certain things, you'll make decisions, and then you'll continue to operate kind of in a different mindset as you think about what's next and how you continue. And so for me, I'm still on that journey. And I think what is most important, there are a couple things I'd say. So one is just the beauty of and appreciating and accepting the journey of becoming yourself. And to do that, you're going to have to unbecome certain things. And I think that is really interesting because, if you think, I'll even take myself, growing up and saying, okay, I want to do this, and, going to school, developing a skill set, and then changing. The reason why I changed was because I started to understand a bit better myself, the things that really, really interested me and how I could apply my skill set. And so that kind of shifted what I wanted to do. And so I think we are all on this continuous journey of unbecoming and becoming. So realizing, okay, who am I? What do I really like? What's really important to me? And even fast forwarding a bit, I try to always ask myself, how do I want to be remembered? What is it that I want to be able to do, to be able to change, to be able to impact? And there's not an answer to that question that's too small or too big in my mind.
So I want to stop you because you're saying so many important things, and I just want to pause for a moment because I love this concept of unbecoming, right? Becoming and unbecoming. And because I am always interested in the emotional, I want to just ask you this question because one of the things that I do explore when I'm working with people, it's this notion of we sometimes do have to give something up, right? So you had, when you said that word about unbecoming, I loved it. And I was thinking about your journey. So here you were, you had this dream, an idea of becoming a doctor since you were young, and you had to unbecome, and you had to give up on that dream. And I wondered, was there a little bit of a mourning process in when you accept and allow yourself to unbecome something and kind of give up that dream?
Absolutely. I actually write about it in my book. There was even before there was this time frame. I'm an extremely extroverted person. I love people, always have, love spending time around people. And there was about a 3-week period when I was in medical school where I was just at home. I actually bought a cookbook that was all about cooking with a food processor. So I bought a food processor, a cookbook, and I was just at home. And that was my mourning period. And so I was mourning this idea of a pathway and a life that I had built up in my head and that I'd worked for years. And then trying to understand, okay, if I'm not doing that, then what does it mean that I go do? And that was hard. That was still to this day one of the hardest decisions. And there were tears. There were days that were really hard. There were days where I needed to get on the phone with really, really great mentors. My parents were fantastic. My family was so fantastic. And I loved, I can't say enough about my family. And I think this is so important for family and parents because they've got to go on the unbecoming journey with their child or their loved one too. And it makes it really, really hard for someone to navigate and do the unbecoming to become if the people around them aren't willing to allow that and do that with them. And so it is really hard. And one of a fantastic speaker and author, his name's Touré Roberts, he talks about how if we're really doing life right, we need to be really good at mourning. And it's really that idea of we are going to evolve and things are going to change, and we've got to get good at letting go of certain things and being okay. And then moving on and looking at, okay, what's the new window or the new door that's open and doing that. And so absolutely, because if you're choosing something, you say yes to something, you're going to have to say no to certain things, or to be able to get to a yes. That means you're going to have to say no to something.
And what's so important that people don't get to really hear about or learn about from people is that the importance of what you did, that you allowed yourself to feel your feelings and experience the downside, the painful feelings. A couple of weeks ago, we did a whole show on extroverts, introverts. And so it's really interesting that you bring that up. But see, you went within yourself and you went through this mourning process and you allowed yourself to feel your feelings and experience the painful stuff, because when we don't do that, it creeps up later. So I love that you did that process, and it is so important. And the other thing that you said is that you had supports that you went to. And sometimes people are not lucky and they don't have the family that is going to support them. And I just want to underscore that, because you knew that you could go to your family and they would support you in your unbecoming. And so when you're choosing who you're going to for supports, I just want to add in that not everybody's going to embrace it, and to just be realistic about that as well. So that, because you might want someone to do that, but they may not be capable of doing that. And so you want to find other kinds of people in your community that will support you.
Absolutely. This is a tough one, I think, but what I've heard often is that if you aren't kind of shifting your circles and the people that you're engaging with, then you're not growing. Because the reality is that everyone that we interact with and that we engage with is not going to come all the way on the journey. Not everyone will, because you're going to shift, you're going to change, you're going to take different directions, you're going to believe different things, and that's going to cause a shift. And it can be tough and it can be scary, but I believe that that's also really important to make sure that you've got the right circle and that you've got a really good circle of people. And I do realize, to the point that you raised, that not everybody has family that can necessarily be that supportive. And so it's okay if your family is a set of friends or other people that you've met. But I think it is really important to, where possible, find a group of people that understand you, support who you are, and can be with you through some of those times. And for me, the other part that has been really important is faith and religion. And so that has also been very helpful in grounding me and also being a source of strength for me.
That is great. And I do want to come back to the religion in one moment. I just want to also underscore something too that you mentioned, and then we'll get back to the religious part, is what's interesting, and especially with you becoming a doctor, that oftentimes for parents and family members, their identity is caught up in their children's identity.
Oh,
so
yes.
I kind of want to just do a plug for the parents out there, that just to be aware of this, that you might be dedicated or have an investment for your own self, that your child becomes something that you want them to become. But if they come to you and they go, I don't think I want to do this anymore, I want to, maybe they don't use the term unbecome, but that's in fact what they're doing, that they want to be something then that's a different than the vision that either they've spoken about or is your vision for them, is to kind of question yourself before you answer them and do a little work on yourself about, well, what's going on with you that you might be opposing to their change in their dream and their unbecoming? Because that's difficult for a lot of people, and I see this a lot in the people that I work with, through either the parents themselves or the reports of having that, where somebody says, my parent wants me to do this, but I don't want to do this, but I have to do this because they say that. And so I just a plug for that and underscore, because it sounds like your family was so willing to help you in terms of what you, and support you in what you wanted to do.
They really were. And that is such an important point, Susan, that you bring up. And so I'm so glad you said it. I think it is so important. And it's tough. And I can't imagine, because I'm not a parent. I do hope to be a parent, but I can't imagine what that is like, to think or have dreams and hopes of your child becoming something in particular, and then that being such a big shift. And so I can't imagine what that's like, but I think it is so important, because they're on a journey too. And they're on a journey of unbecoming and becoming. And it's important to let them go kind of on that journey, because to the point that you made in reference earlier, it will catch up with you somehow. And actually this goes back to the second point I want to make earlier around what's really important. And we were talking about this journey of unbecoming and becoming. And the other part that I spend a bit of time in my book talking about is how you define success and achievement and what that means. And the danger in holding on to something that someone doesn't really want to do, and only doing it because it signals external validation or external success, is that you wind up at a place where nothing's ever enough, and you keep going and going, and there is internal emptiness, unfortunately. And there can be so much accomplishment, there can be so much achievement, but if it's not connected to something that someone's passionate about, what they really believe in, it's really empty. And so you either go on just trying to keep doing the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, because it's not meaningful, it doesn't mean anything, or at a certain point you just kind of burn out, and there's a level of dissatisfaction that's huge, even if externally it seems like, wow, this person's doing everything right and they have the best life. And so it's just so important from an individual meaning and impact, and how do I feel like I'm showing up in the world, and do I feel great about what I'm doing, and how I get to lead my life. And I think that's a core need that we each have, is to feel like, okay, I'm doing this and I feel good about it and it means something. And that gives meaning that I think is really critical and key.
Yeah, and you're bringing up such great points. Because and I've seen a lot of people that come in to work with me in terms of their level of unhappiness within inside. They look from the outside that they're high achievers, very successful people, but they're empty because they're not doing what they wanted to do. But I also want to say something that's really important in terms of what I had said about the parents is that for most parents, they want this because they want what they believe is best for their children. And sometimes you have lots of parents who worked really hard, did not have the same opportunities for them. So it's not that parents, I would suggest not you just say, okay, and go along with it without having some discussion. So if you're a parent and your child suddenly says, well, I'm thinking of doing this and I'm going to switch, you can say, okay, that's great, but have you considered? Have a conversation and ask a lot of questions about why they're making that, and maybe tell them what you're concerned about and share it as a concern. And maybe if you listen, you won't be as concerned as you were because maybe your child has it all planned out. Or maybe you'll be bringing up good questions. But it can be a conversation that's supportive as opposed to just a either yes or no kind of thing. And I'm sure that, Fallon, your parents probably had some discussion with you around what it was going to look like and to consider that. Or maybe you even went with them and they didn't have to ask you the questions because you gave them the answers before they needed to ask it.
Yes. So while I was saying, I'm not going to go into residency and I don't think I'm going to practice medicine, what I was saying yes to was, I'm graduating from a great school, I have a job, and I'm working at a very reputable company, and will gain a skill set, right, that is really critical and sets up a foundation for almost anything else that I'd want to do. So while it was a very tough decision and it was a huge pivot, it wasn't kind of I'm just quitting and sitting on the sidelines. It was okay, I'm going to go do this. This is very reputable. And so I think it was a little bit easier for them in that regard. Although it's interesting because a lot of people weren't surprised when I did it and decided to go into consulting. And so this is also an interesting question just around when there are people that you love, and even your children, and you start to understand them, oftentimes I think that there's some decisions that won't surprise you. Sometimes we are waiting for people to kind of catch up to something that they haven't caught up to yet. And so I think my dad, for instance, told me since I was college, he would say, I don't think you're not going to be a full-time bedside physician. And I didn't understand what he meant. But it was because he could see that I was interested in so many things. And the way he explained it to me, he said, you liked science a lot, but you liked so many other things. And I could see that you had so many interests. And so he said, I didn't think that you would do that every day. And so fast forward 7 or however many years. And he was absolutely right. And they weren't surprised at all. So I think that was very fortunate. I think to the point that you raised, I think it is really, really great to be able to have a conversation and hopefully have a relationship with your child where when they're saying something else that you can say to the point that you raised, okay, here's some things I'm concerned about or that I'd love for us to think about, or if you have a plan for. And I think sometimes there is a part where there's probably a bit more patience required at times. So even as you were thinking about, okay, I really want to do this, or I really want to go, somebody might say, I really want to have impact in healthcare in Nigeria, for example. There are certain skill sets and things that are important to learn to be able to go do that. And so for a lot of things that I am able to do now, had I not gone to school, had I not worked in the roles that I'd worked, I wouldn't have been able to do them. And so part of it is an understanding of where you want to go and how to get there, but there's also a pathway. And sometimes that pathway is not going to be direct. Sometimes it's going to be a layered, stacked pathway that will take time, but you can get there. And so I think the other thing is the idea of understanding this doesn't necessarily mean you can go do it all tomorrow. It does mean that you are clear on it and you know where you want to go. And it may take time because there may be some steps or some prerequisites that you need to get to where you want to go.
And it sounds like you did have a plan, and I just want to underscore a couple of things that you said. One is your father, who kind of sounds like he knew you really well, that although he thought that he couldn't see you becoming a bedside physician, he didn't force you not to or try to convince you not to go. He kind of mentioned it, but he allowed you to follow your own path. You know, he supported you in what you wanted to do, even though he thought that you weren't going to do what you were saying at the time. So that's an important piece, because as a parent, I remember having some moments of that myself with my own daughter, where she had chosen a college that I just thought, oh, she's going to hate this school, but that was where she wanted to go. So I supported her. And, you know, it worked out and she ended up changing it. But it's like we might see it for them, but they need to go through that path just like we needed to go through our own journeys. And it's part of that journey. So I do want to go back to, you talked about religion, and that was something that helped you along the way. So could you talk a little bit more about that and what that meant for you?
So for me, I was raised as a Christian, and it was just very angering from a values perspective and how to think about and navigate uncertainty at times, and how to think about just what I was seeing about myself and the drive and the desire that I had for impact and for helping people. And so for me, it's always just been a grounding force. And no matter how crazy the day, no matter how much uncertainty, no matter what it is, to me, that's just been home base to be able to have that and support the time where I need to go inward and I'm working through something or trying to understand something or making decisions about what's next. And so for me, that's just been so important as a grounding space and a space from which to not only make decisions, but just take action and how I do things each day and how I handle tough conversations and tough situations. So that's how that served me just along the entire journey.
And, you know, it's interesting because I think as a society, we don't talk a lot about that. And I've spoken to a lot of people who you would even think that would be comfortable in talking about that. And people admit that they're uncomfortable to talk about religion and spirituality and what that means for them in terms of their professional success. So I applaud you for being able to bring that up, because most people won't talk about it publicly. And that is one of the things that I think, regardless, whether it's a organized religion, or even if whatever the religion looks like, maybe it's just a spiritual belief system. You know, people are afraid to use these terms, but it's for most people, I think 99% of people, it is guiding principles, whatever those principles are. It is related to either a practice that you've either learned from when you were younger, or something that you pick up on the way, Buddhism, or something that maybe you weren't born into, but that you might learn about. And I'm curious, how does it show up for you? So do you have a daily practice? Whatever you're comfortable in talking about, I think it would be interesting. I mean, I'm interested in hearing about how you incorporate that. You said at times of uncertainty, you will go to that, but do you have also a daily routine that you might practice?
Yeah. So for me, I've been a huge fan of the Bible app. And so I've downloaded that, and it's fantastic because it sends a daily verse, and then it also has plans that you can pick from that are different topics in nature. So one plan might talk about uncertainty, or one might talk about just how do you grow stronger in your faith. One plan might talk about how to be an investor that balances your spirituality and religion, so being a Christian with being an investor. And so typically I have at least 2 or 3 of those kind of going, and every morning I work very hard to make sure that I wake up and I kind of pause. And so I wake up and I am saying, thank you for waking me up today. And that I hope today I am squarely in the will of God, and that every interaction and everything that I'm doing aligns with what He would want for the things that present to me. And I will usually go on the Bible app and read and think about kind of whatever's coming to mind. And so it may be what's coming ahead for the day. So even in our conversation, especially when I'm speaking, I will always pray about that, and always pray that whomever may be listening, that what I'm saying hopefully will resonate with them and will have the type of positive impact that's intended. And so I will do that, and then make sure I do that before getting up and going for the day. There's some times where I kind of get up and I go, because I am not perfect by any means. And when that does happen, I at least kind of say a prayer as I'm going and moving, and getting the day started. And so, while ideally I would wake up and have that time to do that and then think about the day and that type of thing, not every day goes like that. And so there are some get up and go days. And then I try to do that at night as well to unwind. And so that's how I tend to navigate kind of day to day. And then there are churches that I love with pastors that are phenomenal. So I actually watch. Now we all watch anything religious now, given COVID, and so watching those definitely on Sundays, and then at least 1 or 2 midweeks. And then if I have a tough day or something, or because sometimes I may doubt myself, or it's just I'm battling through, I will put on a sermon or 2 from different pastors, and I really admire or that type of thing as I'm doing something, or I'll just pause and listen to something. So for me, that's how I try to navigate. And then in the moment, sometimes we've all been in conversations or situations that are super tough, and in the moment, I will just pause and just say a quick prayer so that I can maintain the composure or respond in the best way, or that type of thing. So for me, that's how kind of my religion, my spirituality kind of is guiding and helping and grounding me day to day.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, because I think it's very brave and beautiful that you do share that. And I think for those of you that, for those people who are out there that are not religious, but one of the things that I recommend to almost everybody I work with, and if it's not done in a religious way, is to just be grateful and to do a grateful list. And to, maybe it's not a prayer, but maybe it's a meditation. And it's interesting because usually I start these sessions with meditations, and we happen to not do it today. We got right in there. But it's so important. So if you're somebody who maybe does not believe in religion, or kind of gets turned off by that concept, do it spiritually or do it with relaxation. There's lots of different ways. And if you do it religiously, great. But there's no right way, but I think it's the same principles, is to focus on what you're grateful for, to look to within, to kind of ground oneself, however you use that, whether it's a breathing exercise or it's a prayer, it doesn't matter, but it's the same concept. So before I open it up to questions, I just want to ask you, if there's anything else that you want to share, because even though we kind of didn't list these skills, I'm hearing them in terms of if you want to create the professionally and personally the life that you want to lead, some of the things that I'm hearing is to have positive supports, to pray, or to ground yourself somehow, to be grateful. What are some of the, and to unbecome, to accept that when you want to say yes to something, you're going to have to say no to something. And it's so interesting because I keep thinking every time you had used earlier the unbecoming concept, I think about Michelle Obama's book, Becoming. And I wonder what she had to give up to become the first lady, right? She had to give up a lot, right? So,
absolutely.
yeah. But what else would you say is so important that you find is part of the skills or the key that one needs to create a professional and personal life that one would love to have?
I would add two things. So the first is that you're going to have to define what success looks like for you, and base that on what matters to you and what's important to you. And this can be hard. I will go ahead and say it can be tough, especially if it is not squarely aligned with what people around you or society generally says is success. And I think when we take a step back, oftentimes, the big markers of success are kind of titles and position. It's probably money. It's where you work, how fast you advance, those types of things. And we're going to, especially professionally and even personally, right? Did you get married at this age, and how many kids do you have, and where are the kids going to school, and you and your partner, it's all of those things. And so both professionally and personally, it's so important to pause and really define what that means for you. And in a personal context, especially if you're married or family, what does that mean for you and your partner? What does that look like? And pieces of it are not going to resonate or reflect with others, and that's okay. And that's what it is. And so there's going to be a path that you're going to take. And I think it's important to take that path. And so that part, I believe, is really important. So really define what success looks like for you, define what the path looks like for you. And the second part that I think is really important is to understand the why, and to track the why. And so for me, a lot of people will ask, well, you've done all of these things that seem completely kind of not related. You were a doctor, then you went into consulting, and then you spent some time in venture capital. Now you write, you speak. Those are all very different things. Why in the world would you do that? And how did you even know? And the thing that has been continuous and has never changed along the journey is the why. And so at the core of who I am every single day, and since I was 7, I wanted to help people and I've wanted to create impact. That was it. And so in the decisions that I've made and the roles that I was taking, they were all connected to that. And so even in venture capital, the first fund that I worked on, it was around healthcare and how do you innovate healthcare and make healthcare better. And in the second one, it was around driving improvements in financial technology and making sure people have financial access and that they have the right training and the skills that they need as jobs evolve, as technology evolves jobs. And the other reason why I'm so keen on venture capital was also because venture capital itself, the industry needs impact and change. It's not very diverse. We don't have a lot of women or people of color.
I'm sorry, I want to just interrupt you because I want you to define what venture capital means, because there's a lot of people that are not familiar what actually venture capital is. So if you could define that, that would be great.
Absolutely. So venture capital in the simplest sense is that there are people who have money and they want that money to generate a return. And they are giving it to people who have invested or have some investment experience and have a strategy for companies that they will invest in. And if they are picking the right companies, those companies should grow to become big enough to drive a return to the people who gave the money. So people, a lot of times, if you think about Facebook is a company that started, was small, was a startup. It got venture capital dollars, grew, and as it went public, you got the returns from that, and that went back to the investors. So that's one company that's an example of that. But just wrapping up, it was just the why. The why has always been that. And so for venture capital, it was about innovation and driving impact by bringing new companies to market. But part of it was also as a woman of color, how can I use what I'm doing to be able to be an example and to help other people think about and understand venture capital as a career path, and to drive the change of how do you diversify that industry and how do you make sure that women and people of color that are starting businesses are capitalized enough. And so all of it has been driven by a similar why, even though the roles have been very different. And I think it's just important to know kind of what's the why for my life, what's the why for what I'm doing, and to track the why. And so as you take roles or you consider things, does that match your why? And if not, is your why shifting, or does that mean that that may not be the best decision to make?
I love that in terms of always thinking about the why. And it reminds me of a personal mission statement, right? So look, when I think about it, it's like I have a personal mission statement in everything that I do, whether it's professionally or personally. Sometimes I think about it consciously, sometimes I don't, but it reminds me of that. Like, do you have a personal mission statement, or is it synonymous with the why?
Yes, exactly. Absolutely.
That's great. This has just been fantastic, and I want to be able to, with the time we have left, open it up. And I definitely, Fallon, want to have you back on, because I have lots of different questions that I want to go to and explore different areas and get more information from you. So if you have any comments or questions, please, you can unmute yourself and put your video on and ask questions. Tom, I see you are on video.
I am, and I mean, you have, why, which starts with the W of 3 letters. Mine is wow, which starts with the W and really expresses it. I think what impresses me, even beyond the extraordinary success, is the fact that you're sharing it, you're writing about it, you're talking about it, you're mentoring. I think that is so important. Going back to the success and the path that you had in your life, I mean, not only are you going to have a good career, you're going to have a very rich life. The world changes, circumstances changed. If we didn't believe it a year ago, we certainly now. And having that breadth of experience and ability to adapt and adopt and so forth with people with you along the way. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts today. I know some of them were really relatively, personal and special. And thank you again.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's so kind. Thank you.
Fallon, I am speechless. It was absolutely amazing. I honestly have notes. I couldn't stop writing. I have to get your book. I'm blown away by you. And what really comes up for me, you are this ideal for me, the synthesis of the medicine, the business, the humanity, the emotional, the whole package, and wanting to have impact. I'm actually wondering, and maybe this is an offline conversation, but one of my whys and something I want to do that will have huge impact and affect the world and be a legacy is to make a huge change, and that is to create community and some structure, entity, business, something for people with severe autism when they become an adult and will not be able to care for themselves. And the system is a failure in every way, healthcare-wise, government-wise, and kids are hitting 21, the entitlement of education ends, and they fall off the cliff. I'm sure you've heard that term. And there's nowhere for them to go. And honestly, parents like me worry what will happen after I die. So we need to create that amazing new entity, community, place where people, whatever their label, neurodiversity, whatever their ability, in society, as the epidemic of autism increases, what are we going to do with all these people? So let's make it all this untapped human potential. Are you the person who helps pull all that together to create this idea, to work with this idea, this thing that must be, to turn it into, from the dream into the concrete reality, and pulling all the players together to make it happen, and looking at the models and looking at how the private and the public and the this and the how everything has to integrate to become a living organism.
That's my superpower. And so what I do most of the time is I'm saying, what do you want to do? What do you want to create? What do you think is important? And then I drive it down to, okay, here's the strategy. Let's get tactical and then get it done. So that's what I love doing. And the bigger, bolder it is, the more I love it. And so I think you're absolutely right. And I have good close friends who have a child with autism. And what you said is spot on, because in talking to them, their child's so young, but their question is, what's going to happen? And does this child become a burden to their siblings as they grow older and we're not here anymore? And how do you figure out what type of future that this child can have, and how they are productive and functional in society, and where's their place? Because there is a place, and it's just about figuring that out. And even the right schools, the right specialists, even getting on that track in the beginning is so important to making sure that as they grow older, that they are as equipped as possible. And so I think you were spot on in a place that's missing for us as a community, and something that I think does need to be addressed. And I'd be happy to have an offline conversation to talk more about what that could look like and to be helpful to you, because I think it's necessary and important.
That is wonderful. And I also want to add another piece to that, which we can continue the conversation offline as well, is that, like Heidi, we know each other, and we've talked about that community that you are in the process of building. And it's great that it's going to get even larger. We've talked about how I see it going and applying to so many different things. But what's interesting, and I just want to throw this out there, is that someone like you and some other families, parents are acknowledging that, right? Then there's a subset of parents that don't think about that really can't embrace the idea that either their older child may have some of these issues, or they may even need to do the planning when they're not here, because that's very painful. And I've worked with families like that. So I just want to throw that as well into it, because there are so many parents and families that are, I'm going to call it in denial. I mean, I hate that term is a little bit judgmental, but I don't mean it judgmental. It's almost like it's too painful for them to acknowledge that their children are in need, and that they're, God forbid the day comes when they do die, it's not going to be that they're able to have an independent life. Because, and as you know, and I know that Heidi, that you work a lot with parents around this issue of accepting, we talked earlier, Fallon, about parents who have a dream for their children, and then when that dream is different for their child than what they want, what happens with that? Well, in this case, it's almost a forced change, because it's not that the child is coming to them and saying that, oh, I'm not going to be this way. It's just reality. And so, I think that can be difficult as well. So this is great, Heidi and Fallon. And I look forward to having you both back on after this whole community is even created even further.
I'm so delighted that you exist, Fallon. Didn't know you existed in the world. Talk about prayer. You're an answer to a direct prayer. So thank you so much for being back.
Absolutely. I look forward to talking to you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any comments or questions?
I would like to just say that I learned so much today, and I didn't expect to learn this much, but I honestly learned such a breadth of information today that I really can't wait to rewatch this segment, actually, because I actually want to go back to a few of the things that you're talking about. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Debbie.
Again, this has been so great. I am going to ask you back, Fallon. And where can people reach you if they want more information? I know they can get you at thementorproject.org, because you are a mentor. And actually, there's a great talk on the Mentor Project website that Fallon gives. It's called The Squiggly Line, and she gives a great talk there. You can see it there as well.
LinkedIn is really easy. And so you can send an invite. If you put a note in there, I will read them. I respond to them. So that's a great way to connect.
I want to thank everyone. If you'd like to get in touch with me, it's Dr. Susan Birne-Stone at gmail.com, or you can get me on LinkedIn or in various places, and also on the Mentor Project. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. And I look forward to seeing everybody next week on another episode of Ask Dr. Susan. Good night, everybody. Be safe. Have a great week. I hope that this series finds you healthy, well, and if you have any questions or comments or need any further information, please contact me. You can reach me at yourvoice@drsusan.nyc. yourvoice@drsusan.nyc or drsusan@drsusancares.com. drsusan@drsusancares.com. Please be safe. Please take care of you and your loved ones. And I look forward to seeing you at the next episode of Your Voice with Dr. Susan, the home edition. Thank you.